Think of the type of conversation you might have with a friend walking to class. Now, think of how that conversation might change if your high school principal were to join in the conversation. What would be different? We adjust our tone and word choice automatically when we speak to different audiences. We should do the same thing when we write. Never is this more important than in the college application essay. In order to achieve your purpose of convincing the college admissions officer of your value, you need to create a tone that encourages connection. You want your reader to like you and want to get to know you better. One strategy you can use is to envision your reader and to write as if you were recounting a story to him. So aim for a conversational tone. Use contractions and words and phrases that you might use when speaking to someone in person. This is a very different tone from academic writing, which should be much more formal and use more sophisticated language. Let's take a look at what this looks like in the sample essay. Follow along as I read this short paragraph out loud. During the school year, it wasn't so bad. The school bus dropped me off about a quarter mile down the road. By the time I got home, it was nearly time to start dinner for me and my mom, who gets home around 5:45 or so. Notice the contractions like wasn't, as well as qualifying words and phrases that you might use when speaking, like about and around 5:45 or so. If I were to take this example and reverse it to something more formal, it would probably sound something like this. The difficulties were more easily faced during the months throughout the school year. I relied on transportation via the school bus, which dropped me off approximately 1/4 of a mile from my home. As soon as I arrived to the house, I had to begin preparing the evening meal for my mother and I, as my mother gets home at approximately 5:45 p.m. Compare it to the paragraph from the sample essay. Which would you rather read? A few specifics to note and to avoid in your own writing. This overly formal tone also encourages passive voice, were more easily faced. See how this sample just states, it wasn't so bad. I also threw in an intentional pronoun error just to see if you could spot it. Did you? Look again. Good for you if you did. My mother and I should be my mother and me. A trick for that, just take out the other person in the phrase. You wouldn't say, I had to begin preparing dinner for I, would you? No, you would say preparing dinner for me. A point to clarify. Conversational tone does not mean that you should use slang or improper grammar or usage. On the contrary, you will need to control your language even more in order to achieve this engaging tone. Using profanity is also something you should avoid. There are rare cases in which you might consider using it for authenticity's sake, in dialogue, for example, but you should weigh the potential advantage of that against the disadvantage of offending a reader. Generally, it's a wiser choice to err on the side of caution. Also, don't try to impress your reader by using big words you don't know. If you're stuck for a word and need some ideas, try visualthesaurus.com. Rather than giving you a list of words you don't recognize, this dynamic website shows how synonyms connect together. In his wonderful essay, Politics in the English Language, George Orwell translates a familiar biblical passage into what he calls modern English of the worst sort. Here's the original. Now, here's Orwell's not-so-tongue-in-cheek translation. I think you probably get the idea. I would encourage you to read this whole essay. So to close, I will leave you with some sound advice from George Orwell. Never use a long word where a short one will do.